Africa today stands at a crossroads, still bearing the scars of colonization, yet filled with immense potential to shape its own destiny. The question is no longer only about what was lost, but about how the continent can rise from those historical challenges to build stronger, more united and future-ready civilizations. How can Africa learn from the past? The Global Civilization Initiative, or GCI, can fuel inclusivity and greater understanding of different cultures, allowing global growth and demonstrating the unity we can have in diversity. With a growing youthful population, Africa holds not just natural wealth, but cultural richness, entrepreneurial spirit, and the possibility of offering new models of resilience and sustainability to the world. This week on the program, we unpack how initiatives such as the GCI can help facilitate a more inclusive future that will allow Africa to grow and become a global powerhouse. I'm Penina Karibe. Welcome to Talk Africa. And joining me now to unpack the Global Civilization Initiative are from Shanghai, Jin Yuchen, Vice President of Shanghai Jingqiao College. From Kampala, we have Ambassador Simon Mulongo, Consultant on Governance, Peace and Security. And with me here in studio is Dr. Kenneth Obongi. He is the immediate former chair, Department of History and Archaeology at the University of Nairobi. Welcome to the program and thank you all for joining us. Now, Dr. Obongi, I will begin with you because in last week's discussion, we revisited some of the great civilizations in Africa, but this history was erased by colonialists. Does the continued reliance on former colonial languages in government and education present a barrier to developing a unique and self-sufficient identity and culture for Africa?
Language is really what I can call the DNA of a people's identity. We know people through their languages. Language is just not a means of communication, but it is what people are. So the persistence of foreign languages in Africa, and unfortunately conceptually, across Africa, there is a group who call ourselves Anglophone Africa. Another group calls itself Francophone Africa. Another one calls itself Lusophone Africa. Partially, that is where the problem is. Because understanding our realities, lived experience and the situations in which we operate using a foreign language are serious limitations. Our education systems are conducted through this foreign language. In case of Kenya, we have English. Some other countries like Chad, they are French. That has been one of the greatest challenges that we face as a continent. A few African scholars, especially Professor Ngui Wadiongo comes to mind. He has had all these debates over the years, calling for what he described as moving the center. Ngugi talked about moving the center, not only using Western frameworks, conceptual frameworks in understanding Africa, but also moving the center in using African languages to describe African realities, African history, African identities, and our way of life.
All right. So, Ambassador Mulongo, beyond national flag independence, have African societies and leaders truly liberated themselves from colonial ideologies and mindsets, particularly regarding what progress means?
Yes, Africa, we got some political liberation in terms of having a flag and other symbols of independence, our national anthems and political boundaries, and calling ourselves sovereign countries. But as long as we do business, not just a matter of lingua franca, but we actually use it to internalize concepts, philosophize and express ourselves in that language, it sometimes clashes with what we know locally. And as such, there has been this question of the identity crisis, when somebody is entrenched into, say, English, and yet you want to bring out an African philosophy and express yourselves in an Africanness, you find there is sometimes a clash, and you wonder whether, am I saying this as African? Then you end up saying no, whereas I'm saying this, the Africans say this. And this tells you that definitely we have not worked hard enough for us to delink ourselves from that cultural bondage, which continues to enslave our mindset, our psychomilieu. And I think that it is something that we must deliberately work on, that we must be able to express, even if we speak it in English, it must be spoken from the perspective of Africanness. Issues of Africanization is on. The question of interpreting Christianity with Africanness, the question of looking at our poetry and so on, our poems, it should be Africanness and not English like it was in the medieval English times. These are things that are supposed to be done and expanded and deepened so that Africa can actually be an African in the essence and also in form.
Mr. Jean, how does the external world's tendency to view Africa as a single homogeneous entity rather than diverse sovereign nations impact the continent's standing on the global stage?
China is really one of the earlier, countries to realize how diverse Africa is and how diverse the cultures are, and that's why China has the GCI initiative, basically recognizing that there are many civilizations within the continent, and each country has its own characteristics and its own cultural roots. And it's really important to realize that. And when it comes to trade, to cultural exchanges and other forms of cooperation, it's really important to realize the nuance. And viewing Africa as just this one homogeneous continent really hinders the cooperation between Africa and other parts of the world. And because it is so diverse, both from a language standpoint and from a cultural standpoint, from a religious standpoint, it is very diverse. And obviously we're seeing that even many of the Western countries realize that it is not a homogeneous continent. And it's really important I think it's really important for other countries to learn more about Africa and what each country stands for, and what cultures are there. So it's really important for Africa to bring out the nuance and the individuality and the identities. I think that's very important.
So, Mr. Jean, you mentioned the GCI. Let's talk a little bit about that. It was proposed by President Xi Jinping in March of 2023. The Global Civilization Initiative, or GCI, as we've been calling it, advocates for cultural inheritance and innovation. Why is it important? And what does GCI tell us about decolonizing and reclaiming our cultural identity?
Well, that's a great question. Obviously, President Xi initiated the GCI initiative. Is one of the most important initiatives, coming from China. And at the core of the GCI initiative is the understanding of there's no ideological conformity, and China really promotes that because China too was a victim of imperialism and colonialism. And we realized that over the course of our development, we realized that there's not just one path, a development path that's suitable for every country, right? Each country has its own right to develop in its own way. And gladly, China found its own path. Obviously, we've struggled and we've made mistakes along the way, but we've also achieved many great things over the years. And I think we've finally found the right path for China. And we need to respect each other. And through that respect, we can find ways for new cooperation and new development.
Right. So, Dr. Obongi, coming to you, there's something Mr. Jean has mentioned when he was explaining the GCI, and that was our individuality, not losing that, even as we seek to develop ourselves and grow ourselves. What is your understanding of these two concepts, modernization and westernization? Especially, why is it important for Africa to distinguish between the two as the continent seeks to develop itself?
There are ways in which it is not yet independence. in Africa. One of the opposition leaders in the country in the 1960s wrote his autobiography, which is in Swahili, in English, yes, not yet Uhuru. Yes. Uhuru is independence in Swahili. The reality is that in many countries in Africa, a number of readers are still very good students of an overly Eurocentric views of reality. They have not liberated themselves from that. And what we are looking for is a way to move, to have some kind of what one could call the second liberation. Modernization denotes progress, progress in terms of, developing infrastructure, up-to-date and standard infrastructure that serves the people, raising the standards of people in terms of, let's say, per capita income. Now, Westernization is actually developing using concepts and notions and frameworks of the West. In a sense, one is an outcome, development or modernization is an outcome, and Westernization is the route towards that outcome, is the pathway towards that outcome. But what we are saying is that the West does not have a monopoly of what development is. We are opening up the world where we allow plurality in informing what we do. And part of the reason why in a number of ways things have not worked in a number of countries in Africa is that the templates we use for our development are developed in Washington, are developed in London, are developed in Paris, are developed in Berlin, and are implemented here. They can't work. What I think I see as the greatest role of this initiative, of Global Civilization Initiative, is the appreciation that there is no civilization that has a monopoly in understanding what development is. We need to appreciate plurality and begin to see the African continent not just as a beer pool of civilization like Eurocentric views have done over the years, but as a partner in renewing human civilizations and human existence.
Right. I like what you said about societies getting templates that work for them. So Ambassador Mulongo, the GCI emphasizes on exactly that each nation has the right to choose its own path to modernization, which should not be synonymous with Westernization. Why does GCI emphasize that each nation has the right to choose its own path to modernization?
If we talk about the most recent advancement from the 1500 and beyond, we have seen a lot of civilizational developments peculiar to every group. And so you cannot say that this civilization can be superior or less superior to the other. It is as important to the communities depending on their environment, the circumstances, and whatever characteristics that define them to be. In Africa, by the time colonialism came, we had our own level of civilization. There is no civilization that can really be used to impose on the other. We just have to respect the diversity and find a way of interrelating with each one of them. We may, of course, have cross-pollination. If we see something is superior in comparison with ours, then we can adapt to that. Because civilization is about adaptation, a way of survival, a way of growth, a way of being competitive. And as such, we need to be appreciative of one another's civilization. We are shocked as scholars when we see the write-ups of the likes of Huntington, when he talked about clash of civilization. And he wants to posture that the civilization he was talking about is simply blocks of static civilizations, and each one of them looking at eliminating the other. And moreover, that's not the case. Time immemorial, we've had civilizations that integrate, that interact, even through intermarriage or socialization or through business and trade and so on. And that's how civilizations manage to grow. But what we see today, Madam Penny, is that the West wants to dominate. They want us to speak English, live like English, eat like English, swallow like English, and think like English. But we're not English. we're not. We have backgrounds that are not English. And even the blacks in America, they're not quite American. They're called African Americans. And actually, if you look closely at the blacks in America are not quite like the Caucasians. They live quite an exclusive lifestyle. So as such, I think the only way is not to exterminate the blacks in America or dominate them, but to respect and look at them as contributors to the growth and development of America. And so is the global world. So GCI wants that, mutual respect and understanding one another and seeking exchange as equal partners. And that, to me, what GCI comes in to salvage what is going so wrong already.
Well, Ambassador Mulongo, I'm very glad you actually referenced Professor Huntington and his theories, because that is where we're going to pick it up from when we come back from the break. But for now, let's take that short break. When we come back, we will continue this discussion on the GCI and its impact on Africa. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Talk Africa. Still with me are Jean Yu Chen, Ambassador Simon Mulongo, and Dr. Kenneth Obongi. Now we continue our discussion on the GCI and its impact on Africa. And my question is to you, Dr. Obongi. Just before we took the break, Ambassador Mulongo referenced Professor Samuel Huntington and his book, The Clash of Civilizations. And he writes that in the post-Cold War world, the primary source of global conflict will no longer be ideological or economic, but cultural. So the question is a clash of civilizations inevitable?
No, it is not. Unless you look at it from the eyes of where Huntington was looking at it from. Actually, the idea of the clash of civilization was hinted earlier on by Francis Fukuyama in his work entitled The End of History. And the end of history here implied that when the Cold War ended, history somehow ended, and the world will begin afresh in what the then American President George Bush Sr. called a new world order. It is on the basis of that that Huntington talks about a clash of civilization out of a world that was more ideological than cultural. And he grouped the world into different cultures. But when you look at it, it's not inevitable. Civilizations don't have to clash. Civilizations need to converse, as it were, have a conversation. Because when you talk about civilization clashing, it's because we have some civilizations that are more hegemonic than others. By hegemony, I mean stronger and lording it over others. What is happening, for example, in the Middle East, the Israelis and Palestinians, you know, hegemony is at play. And one group is failing, they are oppressed, so they will fight back. Civilizations need not clash. They need to have a conversation of how do we move from here? How do we make our world better, where all of us are partners, not hierarchies of power and hierarchies of cultural notions.
Right. So, Ambassador Mulongo, to what extent are today's conflicts fueled by this clash of civilizations? What are the real root causes of wars?
Conflicts have their own basis for emerging, and whether structural factors, whether immediate causes or even triggers. They are to do with the issues of interests, that to do with the issues of dominance, the issues of denial and lack of independence, dialogue which fails and then it turns out into violence. So as such, it is not just about civilizations. And Dr. Bongi has just brought in the question, the issue or example of Middle East, particularly Palestine and Israel. These are people who have common geo-ethnic and geo-social relationship. But the differences come in when one, simply because of worshiping another god, and wants to dominate the other and even want to annihilate the other. That has nothing to do with the civilization in the Middle East. And as such, the publication by Professor Huntington about clash of civilization, it never was and never has it been. It is just about clash of interests, clash of domination and those who are dominated, and that's what characterizes the war today.
So, Mr. Jean, why does the GCI advocate for dialogue over confrontation? I mean, we've had several examples of the conflicts we're witnessing right now around the world. But tell us, are there common values that nations can agree upon to bridge the geopolitical gap?
I think at the core of GCI is really, just as you mentioned, is dialogue, because dialogue is the only path forward. If we try not to have a conflict, then dialogue is the only way forward. And at the end of the day, we're seeking the same thing. I think every country and every society is looking for peace, justice, and prosperity. And there's so much we can achieve through South-South cooperation. I think the Forum on China and Africa cooperation is a great example of that. How China together with Africa can achieve great things. And China today really stands for the alternative path, right? And all the way from infrastructure to funding and to a deeper cooperation. I think there's really so much that we can do together. And as a Chinese person, right, I'm such a huge fan of folk arts, and one of the greatest Chinese, I would say, performing arts is called crosstalk. It's basically like a stand-up comedy show. And the most famous piece from the 70s is actually called Ode to Friendship. It's about the Tanzania, it's about the Tanzania-Zambia railway that was built in the 70s by some of the Chinese engineers and workers. And this was a great example of how China and Africa can work together. And when it comes to, climate change and other matters, we need collective effort from every corner of the earth, and that's why dialogue is the only way forward, and there's really no alternative. The alternative would be conflict and wars. I think GCI really stands for a solution to a multipolar world where every country can benefit from this initiative. I think it calls for first mutual respect and mutual benefit, and then calls for deeper cooperation between regions based on that mutual respect and mutual benefit framework. I think, in today's day and age, it can serve as a major source for future cooperations between China and other countries. And it's a great example of how a society can collectively achieve something great. And going forward, this form of cooperation is really based on the mutual beneficial relationship between China and other countries.
Right. So, Dr. Obongi, do you get a sense that diversity is being criminalized or punished? I mean, when we look at the conflicts happening all around us, why is imposing on others cultures alien to them likely to lead to resentment and conflict?
Is it Penina at the center of any group of human beings is something the English call dignity, So when other people look to control others, they actually violate this basic need of everybody to be dignified, to be honored, to be respected. I think that is what has been missing in many of the conflict places that we have in and around the world. And that's why, probably to some extent, I could agree with our colleague from Beijing that the talk of a multipolar world, where we are saying there is no one single way of looking at reality. Our Nigerian colleague Adeche has talked about the tragedy of the single story. But that is what we have lived under over the years, over this overwhelming Western-centered way of looking at reality, appropriating knowledge, and many others. So the point I'm trying to make is that an environment dominated by mutual respect, the dignity of the people involved in the interactions is what will assure that we don't have conflicts and clashes that, like the one that Huntington is talking about.
Right, so my final question will go to all three of you. I'm quoting President Xi, and he said, history has shown us that exchanges and mutual learning among civilizations are essential for civilizations to flourish and human progress to be made. Now, one example is perhaps on technological advancement, where we share, we learn, and make technologies such as DeepSeek, which is an open source AI model developed in China, more available to others. So, Ambassador Mulongo, I will begin with you. How does the GCI make this learning and sharing of technology possible?
Thank you so much. I just want to use the two words by my colleagues, issues of mutual respect, issue of dignity, and I want to add on the last one, recognition. It is important that whatever transfer, technological transfer, learning and exchange, puts into account those three conceptual, philosophical issues, that we're able to learn from China and be able to receive recognition from China that we deserve, and that we do so with mutual respect, and we do so with dignity, and that's very fundamental. Africa deserves that, and we need something of that approach.
Right, Mr. Jin, what are your thoughts on this?
There's so much we should learn from each other, and there's so much we can learn from each other. And you mentioned DeepSeek and other technological innovations coming out of China and other parts of the world. I think some of the open source models we've seen in China really allows for the technology to be used by other, societies at a much lower cost, and provides this alternative path to just Western technological dominance. And we've also seen local languages like Swahili and Yoruba flourishing on these digital platforms. So I think this is a great example of how the two sides can work together to bring about prosperity and technological advancement. And again, we need to be constantly learning from each other.
And Dr. Obongi, your thoughts as we wrap up?
Thank you, Penina. I want to summarize everything that we have discussed today with three words: dialogue, confrontation, and conversation, DCC. Now, dialogue, in my view, is actually one of the greatest form of intelligence of any civilization, talking with each other and understanding and appreciating that this world has enough for all of us, not just for a few groups. Dialogue builds, confrontation destroys. For us to avoid confrontation, we have to have a conversation in an environment of mutual respect as equals, not as conquerors and the conquered. That is the only way we are going to be able to exchange even the knowledge, the digital knowledge that we are talking about. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. And that's all for this edition of Talk Africa. A very big thank you to all of my guests: Jin Yu Chen, Vice President of Shanghai Jinqiao College; Ambassador Simon Mulongo, Consultant on Governance, Peace and Security; and Dr. Kenneth Obongi, who is the immediate former Chair, Department of History and Archaeology, and also Associate Dean, Research and Postgraduate Studies at the University of Nairobi. Remember, you can be a part of this conversation online through our social media handles on Facebook and X. You can also catch the show on our YouTube playlist. Do keep the conversation going and join us again next week for more Talk Africa. From me, Penina Karibe, and the entire team here in Nairobi. Until next time, it's goodbye.